what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
listen, I hate the idea of like labeling someone a traitor. Like, I'm not that hard of a nationalist to be like embracing that kind of language. It makes me a bit uncomfortable. But at the
Yeah.
same time,
Just
like,
put on your cop
she is a
glasses.
traitor. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. Danielle
Hit
Smith
us.
is a traitor. Okay, there. I've said it. I'm okay. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Campaign Cops. For those of you who are on audio only, we both just put on our sunglasses because we are very serious law enforcement actors on this election campaign.
Cops always wear sunglasses, so yeah.
Always, always. Yep. I'm Rachel Gilmore. I'm your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. And with me here is Paris Marx. Paris, you want to introduce yourself to the people?
Sure. I write about tech and host a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us, and it happens to be that I'm a Canadian and have thoughts on Canadian politics.
Woo! And Canada is officially in an election campaign, and someone has to crack down on the people vying for your vote. So we are reporting for duty. And in this mini podcast series, we'll be doing something unusual for cops. We'll be holding the most powerful people accountable. Because as politicians pander, promise, and play dirty, we're here to talk about it all. Are you ready, Paris?
I'm ready.
Let's dive in. Paris, we're filming this on Sunday, and Mark Carney just officially plunged us into an election campaign. We both watched the speeches today. I guess the first thing that I would note is that we know it's going to be a super short election, right? So we're going to be voting on April 28th, which means this is the shortest that an election campaign is legally allowed to be, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, maximum 5 weeks. Personally, I love it. I like
Same.
a short election. I like, we of course all watch the elections down south, and it's like, how do they have an election campaign for 2 years? And
Yeah,
so when they
exhausting.
announce like 5 week election, I'm like, perfect. This is great. We don't need more time than that. I remember like back in the mid 2010s when Stephen Harper plunged us into that 11-week election campaign. I never want that again. So 5 weeks, perfect. I love it.
Yeah, I think it also makes a lot of sense for the Liberals just strategically, right? Because they're up in the polls for the first time in a very long time. And I think just because that's such a recent phenomenon, they recognize how easily they could lose that. So I think the shorter the amount of time possible for them to lose it, the better.
Totally. You want to try to hold on to that momentum, right? And
Exactly.
and if you only have 5 weeks, like the assumption is it can only go down so much, and you limit the amount of time that the conservatives have to, actually kind of gain back some territory.
Yeah. Or to just straight up make stuff up, which we saw Polyev is already starting to do in his
Oh, totally.
campaign. So that's super fun.
Well, he's been doing
Um,
that the whole time, so
oh
of
my
course he's going to
God.
continue now.
You know what? One thing he said is that he's always been consistent, right? He's always been
Yeah,
consistent.
a consistent
So,
liar. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, he's got this new bit of disinfo on the Century Initiative, claiming that Mark Carney wants to get our immigration up to 100 million, or get us up to a population of 100 million citizens by like I don't actually know what the timeline is on
I
that,
think
but I
it's
think
2100 actually.
oh
So,
okay, so one more
yeah,
before.
yeah. I like
Perfect.
I think that's the proposal. That's what someone said to me earlier
Okay.
today, and I
Oh,
was
that makes
like,
sense with the
legit.
century.
Yeah, like I was like legit like 100 million Canadians by 2100 probably sounds like not unreasonable actually.
Yeah, especially, maybe people keep having babies too.
That's the hope,
If the world
Yeah.
doesn't, yeah, if the world doesn't collapse before then. Which is possible because as we saw, climate change has disappeared from the radar in these campaigns, it feels like. We
But
had Mark
but
Carney
Rachel,
made
Mark Carney is like a very serious climate change guy. That's what he has worked on since being the Bank of Canada or Bank of England governor.
yeah, the only time that he mentioned the environment really was to use the words clean energy in his speech. So that was cool.
Love it.
I just want to also return really quickly because I brought up a thing that Polyev was lying about, and I didn't finish the fact check. I just said the lie. So I feel like I should just infuse this on top of the fact that, we're not even clear about what this Century Initiative exactly is or how feasible it is, or maybe it would just naturally happen. He literally said in the Q&A today that Carney would keep our current immigration caps that the Liberals brought in that have been criticized as being quite restrictive. So, it's clear that that is just immediately a bit of disinfo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of
Just
many pieces.
yeah, exactly. Polyev is just totally throwing the energy industry that's at the forefront, and the environment is totally gonzo from his speech. Like, he's talking about fast tracking approvals of our mining in the Ring of Fire. He's talking about, building more pipelines, just tons of resource extraction. There's like zero mention of the actual environmental policy. And he's also wanting to scrap the industrial emitters carbon tax, which is the biggest part of our current emissions reduction plan. So, like, do people even care about climate change anymore, or are we just too scared of the world collapsing for other reasons before the environment has a chance to get us?
No, I think they do, right? And I think it's
Yeah.
one of a number of issues that Canadians will be looking for an answer on, right? We know that the majority of Canadians vote for more progressive parties, right? Even though, yeah, there is a sizable number of people who will vote conservative, and a smaller number of people who are open to that. But I think it really stood out to me when he came out and said that he was going to abolish the industrial carbon tax as well, right? Because for the past 2 years, Polyev has been incessant about the carbon tax, has made this a central issue. And I think a lot of the assumption as he was saying that, even though the Conservatives would never actually confirm it, was that he was talking solely about the consumer carbon tax, and that they were going to keep the industrial carbon tax because even Alberta supports the industrial carbon tax, right? But when Mark Carney came out and said, actually, we're getting rid of the consumer carbon tax, and then, on his first day on the job as Prime Minister, actually got rid of it, then all of a sudden, this talking point that the Conservatives have been using for the past 2 years to try to, drum up opposition to Justin Trudeau specifically, and the Liberals more broadly, was gone. And so the Conservatives then, I feel like they made this kind of, calculated choice to say, okay, we still need a carbon tax to run against, so we are going to run against the industrial carbon tax. And for me, I think back to like the Andrew Scheer campaign and the, what was the other guy's name? It started with an E. I
Aaron
can't
O'Toole.
remember. Yeah, him.
Yeah, the
And like,
current black sheep of the Conservatives getting attacked
yeah.
by Pierre's campaign manager on
But
Twitter.
like, I think back to their campaigns and like
Yeah,
climate, and the fact that they couldn't really be trusted to even have a plan to address climate change became a real knock against them, along with like, the usual things that the Liberals and the NDP will bring up against the Conservatives. Can you trust them on abortion rights? Can you trust them on gay rights? Can you trust them on social services and healthcare? These things are always there. But the other piece of that is climate change, right? Can they have a real climate change policy? Are they actually going to address that? And I think with Pierre Poilievre explicitly saying, like, not only is he going to get rid of the industrial carbon tax, but like part of his argument is pretty much Canada is not going to worry so much about reducing its emissions because we are going to sell natural gas to India and allow them to replace their coal with natural gas, and that's going to reduce their emissions. So now we don't need to worry about it because we're helping them instead. Like, this is the kind of like climate denialist rhetoric we are seeing advanced by Pierre Poilievre. And listen, like, there are obviously Conservatives who don't care about climate change, who don't see it as an issue, but I think the vast majority of Canadians do, and even a number of people who he has like pulled over to his side. And so as the Liberals kind of, say some more conservative stuff now that Mark Carney has taken over, I think it's going to ultimately be a knock against Poilievre and the Conservative campaign.
totally. So we give him a ticket for that one.
Yeah.
Pulling in our cop theme. Yeah.
You're so committed to this
Oh
cop
yeah,
theme.
yeah, yeah. I'm
I'm a
I'm
bit uncomfortable with
branding
it
this,
even.
baby. I know. That's the goal, is to make you as uncomfortable with it as possible. Um, yeah, no, it's bad, and it's so short-sighted too, because if you claim to care about the economy, you should care about climate change, because the economic impacts of natural disasters and all kinds of things are massive. All kinds of things
And
that are
not
linked to
only
climate
that,
change.
right? Like, at the moment, in Canada, we are talking about reorienting our economy away from the United States as much as possible. And a big part of that is like renewing our relationship with Europe, taking advantage of CETA, the free trade agreement that we have with Europe. And we know that Europe is bringing in a border carbon tax. So countries that don't have effective carbon pricing are going to be basically hit with a tariff when they trade into Europe. And the UK is doing that a year later. So if we are looking at kind of increasing trade with Europe and the UK as being one piece of how we address the increasing threats that we're feeling from the United States, getting rid of carbon pricing is working against us there and is going to make sure that our goods and whatever we are exporting is going to be hit with tariffs from the countries that we're hoping we're going to be able to trade more with. Like, it's completely counterproductive and makes absolutely no sense.
Totally. So let's talk a little bit more about the different kind of announcements that we've seen so far, how people are gearing up for this campaign and how they're trying to brand themselves for it, right? One thing I noticed was that the noted leftist Pierre Poilievre seems to be trying to go after the worker vote and the union vote. He made an announcement, like one of his last announcements before the campaign launch was "Boots, not suits." That's a new slogan. What do you think of that? In French, it's "des bottes, pas des cravates," which is so catchy. What do you
Yeah,
think of this
they're really
slogan?
like throwing everything at the wall here, right? To try to find something
100%.
that's gonna stick. And I don't think that's gonna be the one. Like I
No.
would say, I think if he's trying to win like some union votes, the thing is that the conservatives, there are some like private sector unions that are much more kind of open to voting conservative. We saw that in the Ontario election, and have seen it in recent Ontario elections. But in general, like a lot of the unions, a lot of the public sector unions in particular, are going to be supporting the NDP or the Liberals, right? Especially given what we're seeing right now. But yeah, it just seems completely silly. And his more like extreme populist conservative party is obviously trying to play into this thing that we saw south of the border with Trump and see with other extreme right-wing parties, where they do try to present themselves as like caring about the workers, caring about the working class, and then will completely betray them, which is of course what we're seeing south of the border, where it is workers are being fired, where these tariff policies are going to really hurt the economy and different sectors of the economy, and of course as well are going to lead to price rises that the average person is going to feel much more than the rich or anything like that. That is the consequence of what we see with the Trump policies that are being implemented right now, even though he also sold himself as a champion of the working class. And I think we would see something very similar with Pierre Poilievre. Sure, he talks a good game in terms of affordability and helping workers, but we know the policies that a conservative government would be likely to take on the whole would be beneficial of the wealthier people in society, not the working classes who he needs to win over, but is ultimately, I think it's fair to say, lying to with the type of political positioning he's making.
Yeah, and I really want to put a pin and come back to the difference between his like rhetoric and his actual policy. But one thing that is super interesting is like he's clearly trying to get a piece of this collapsing NDP vote, right? Like the NDP is increasingly almost a non-factor in this election, and I don't think that they're going to be able to turn that around during this election campaign. They've got the same leader. They're not making any really distinctive policies. They're not pivoting, to be more left wing, for example. The only big policy announcement that they made right before the election campaign was about F-35s and canceling a deal with the US. So, just like really radical left stuff.
And
So I
like
don't know. What do
basically
you
coming
think?
after, Carney and the Liberals said that they're re-examining this deal anyway. So instead of
Yeah.
saying they're re-examining it, they're just saying they'll get rid of it. And it's like, okay, but like the
Yeah.
Liberals are like kind of signaling they're gonna do the same thing. So like, how is this really setting you
Yeah.
apart?
Totally. Yeah. And so I don't know. I think that the NDP is really it's interesting to have really a two-party race, which I think our system unfortunately in some ways gears itself towards, even though we have multiple parties, and that's frustrating because I think it's actually really healthy to have this like several different perspectives and several different parties. But
That's
I
why I
don't know.
want
I mean,
proportional representation and
I
was
know,
mad
don't
at
we
Justin
all?
Trudeau
Thanks,
when he killed it.
Trudeau.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he was
He
so
really
addicted to
regretted regretted not going forward with electoral reform,
He
though.
really regretted not going forward with a ranked ballot, which was
Exactly,
the system he
exactly.
wanted the whole time, which was why things
Yeah.
didn't end up happening. But so we're seeing Polyev trying to go after, boots, not suits, and we've got, Carney just came out and made a dental care announcement right before the launching the election, which is, arguably a much more progressive policy, and also I think is actually just smart strategically, because that's
Mhm.
something that Pierre Poilievre has really attacked Mark Carney on, has been that or sorry, not Mark Carney, but just the Liberals in general,
Yeah.
has been the dental care policy. He's called it made up and said that it doesn't really exist. So this is just making it much harder for him to keep hitting that line. But what do you think? Do you think that the Liberals will be able to continue stealing that collapsing NDP vote? And do you think that, because, like, okay, one thought that I'm having is clearly a lot of this momentum that's surging the Liberals into majority territory is coming from the left vote. It's coming from the NDP. The Conservatives have dropped, but not as significantly as the NDP has collapsed. So do you think that they are going to be successful in courting and retaining these left votes just because of Polyev being so unlikable and Trump-like? Or what do you think? I mean, he's also axing the capital gains tax. He's also like doing these other things that are much more right-wing. And I don't know. I feel like Carney's sort of trying to talk out of both sides of his mouth in terms of political ideology.
He is, and he's succeeding so far, right? Like his pitch to the Liberal membership is, kind of echoes something that we've been hearing in the media for a while. This kind of narrative that the media has been playing with, that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals under him were too far left. They spent too much money. All this, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That was kind of what we have been hearing for the past little while. So when we get to the Liberal leadership race, Mark Carney is saying, they're going to spend less and invest more, whatever that is supposed to mean. That the government needs to spend less money, that they spent too much on, social programs and stuff, even though he also says that he believes, the Canadian model that we need to defend is one where we do provide this safety net for workers, but, we also promote like a healthy economy and stuff. So he's playing both sides of this, where on the one hand, he is, making these concessions to the right that say, progressive conservatives might find more appealing, to try to bring some of them back from the Conservative Party, which I think we are very much seeing happening. But I think that the announcements on the extension of the dental care program, so now 18 to 64s, I think it will be able to receive coverage through that program over the next few months, is actually really smart strategically, because if you are an NDP voter who is thinking about voting Liberal now, and you're like, I don't know, is he going to be too right wing? This kind of assures you that, listen, they are committed to some of these social programs, some of these wins that the NDP had in this agreement that they had with the Liberal Party for the past few years, and so that dental care is sticking around. And then the other piece of this, of course, is I don't think it's like, you can't ignore the fact that we are in this situation where Canada's sovereignty feels like it is at threat, that there are a lot of Canadians who are really worried about that. And I think more than anything, that is what is driving a lot of these NDP voters, and it seems to a certain degree Bloc voters as well, and of course some Conservative voters too, back to the Liberals, because there's a feeling that you cannot allow Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to come to power and to deal with Trump, because they're far too close to them. And so even if you are someone who is typically more progressive, more on the left than what a Mark Carney Liberal Party would be, you are willing to kind of hold your nose and, give the Liberal Party your support to make sure that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives do not get to power. Obviously we'll have to see how Mark Carney does through the campaign, how the issues evolve, how Donald Trump kind of, acts during the course of these 5 weeks. But it seems pretty clear, at least from the vantage point that we're looking at right now, that is probably going to hold, unless, Carney really screws up over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was watching his speech today, Carney's, when he was talking about having more productivity in government and how he's got a dedicated department to it, and he was like dropping AI mentions and stuff, I was like,
Yeah,
okay, that you don't want to get too musky with this, okay? Like
exactly.
it was sounding like Doge to me, and I was like,
Me too.
ooh, I don't like that. Okay, I'm glad I wasn't alone in that. I felt like
Yeah,
that was like a real weak point personally, in terms of
the
like
the
trying to
Department
make
of
sure you
Government Transformation. I was
I
like, this
it's
sounds way
literally,
too doji. Yeah.
yeah, it's dot instead of doge. But
Exactly.
yeah,
And then the other piece, of course, is how he wants to roll out AI in the federal government to like make it more efficient and productive, as you're saying, right? And this
yeah.
not only sounds like what we hear south of the border, but one of my big criticisms, of course, and I think I've said this to you, is that to me, the Carney Liberal Party feels a lot like what we see with Keir Starmer's Labour Party in the
Mm,
UK. That came to power because the Conservatives were so unpopular over there after over a decade in power, and have seen their kind of support drop off so quickly because they're adopting austerity. They're, adopting AI and really pushing AI policy and this notion that like, we need to adopt AI for the future of the economy. And I see so many overlaps between what the Carney Liberal Party is trying to do and what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is already doing in the UK. He was the governor of the Bank of England. He has close relationships with Keir Starmer and with Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK. And I think that he is pulling a lot from them as he sets
mm,
out to try to, maintain his prime ministership for the next 4 years or however long he might be in power.
yeah. If he pulls it off, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because and one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier was how a big part of what that's dependent on and whether the liberal lead holds is Trump, right? Trump is just like the dark cloud. I'm at that point reading Lord of the Rings, reading Return of the King right now. There's like a dark cloud moving over Gondor, and I feel like that's Trump with this election campaign.
Yeah. The dark
And
cloud is moving south over Canada, yeah.
yeah, yeah, moving south over Canada. Nice.
Or north. Oh my God. It's
Oh.
not coming from Russia, or at least not yet,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean it could be, arguably,
Yeah.
depending
Maybe
on,
from both sides. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, no, I think that Danielle Smith kind of just came out and gave the whole game away, which was
Can
um
you believe that?
that
Like,
was so stupid.
yeah, but sorry, please describe what she said. But
Yeah, so Danielle Smith came out and she basically said that she asked the US administration to put the whole tariff things just on pause during the elections campaign to make sure Polyev wins because it was giving the liberals a boost in the polls, which is wild because first of all you're implying that you would be willing to work with Trump to get Polyev elected, which also therefore implies that if he's open to it then Trump is supportive of Polyev, right? And then also it's just like traitorous. What do you think, Ferris?
absolutely. And she said this in Breitbart,
I
of all
know.
places.
Oh,
But
I'm
like
so
how
surprised that more people aren't talking about the source there.
I
Like,
I
why are you
know.
talking to such a extreme far right publication? Like, that is
Well,
beyond. I know.
because
We
of
know
her
why. We know
politics.
why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I think that's also reflected in like how Polyev is not allowing traditional media to go on his campaign plane and to travel with him, right? And we know that he has been like allowing these more right wing and hard right media organizations, if we want to call them that, in Canada to be like asking questions at his press conferences. We have seen this alignment between this more extreme conservative party, and these forms of media. And I think that Danielle Smith comments were really illustrative because we have already heard this criticism of Danielle Smith that she's really offside with the other premiers, that she's not supporting this broader campaign to push back on the threats from the Trump administration and the United States. And now to hear her like go in Breitbart News right on the cusp of a Canadian federal election and say, I asked the Trump guys to like hold off for a bit so we can get a conservative party and then like they can go wild, like whatever, is like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
listen, I hate the idea of like labeling someone a traitor. Like, I'm not that hard of a nationalist to be like embracing that kind of language. It makes me a bit uncomfortable. But at the
Yeah.
same time,
Just
like,
put on your cop
she is a
glasses.
traitor. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay. Danielle
Hit
Smith
us.
is a traitor. Okay, there. I've said it. I'm okay. Yeah. But like it's completely wild to me that this is a premier in our country. Like I know the Albertans are much more conservative than a lot of other parts of the country, but like I have to imagine even a lot of people in that province are like really pissed off about what their premier is doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of conservatives are also quite nationalist and quite patriotic, right? So that kind of
Totally.
just like craven, just abandoning all of your patriotism and nationalism in service of power, whatever that power looks like, even if it's short-lived. I mean, if Trump is, if Polyev wins and Trump is like buddy buddy with him, which again we don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case to any kind of extreme degree. Would that kind of exchange even pay off well? Because ultimately, like the power that Danielle Smith is seeking there, she would lose if we become annexed, unless I guess she's given something in the exchange. But I don't know.
Yeah,
It seems
but
really
it's like,
ridiculous. Yeah.
yeah, but because it's like the segment of the conservative voter base that is like pro-Trump, there is a segment there, but it was
Yeah.
already
About a third.
rather small to begin with, and it has gotten smaller
Mhm.
since Trump has been threatening Canada in the ways that he has. We've seen polling that maximum like 20% of Canadians are even open to the idea of thinking about it being a 51st state. And, the rest are like kind of vehemently opposed to these notions. And so how can Danielle Smith not realize that going in Breitbart News and openly saying these things is not going to hurt the National Conservative campaign? Like, that is going to be deployed against Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives at every opportunity by the Liberals and the NDP and the other parties, because it does make the Conservatives more broadly look traitorous and look like they are going to work with Trump, and kind of sell us out. And so obviously that feels like it benefits the Liberals even more, and those like more nationalist conservative voters who have stuck with the Conservative Party. You have to imagine that that makes them have second thoughts and say, maybe I do just need to hold my nose again and vote Liberal.
Yeah. So Danielle Smith, is she really stupid or is she secretly a liberal?
I think you
I
know
don't
my
know.
answer.
Ooh. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you know mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too. Like, I'm curious about your thoughts on that clip that everyone was talking about right before. Trump just came out when he was asked about the Canadian election, and he said he would rather work with a liberal, but that he doesn't really care who wins. But he was like, me and Polyev don't get along or something, or he said some nasty things about me. I was trying to decide when I was listening to that if there was any strategy behind that, or if it was just egotistical Trump just ragging about someone who's insulted him, and then, but also making sure to say he doesn't like anyone, despite conservatives trying to frame that as an endorsement of Carney. Or if it was a little bit strategic because of the fact that, saying that he would rather work with a liberal, again, does kind of play to that thing that Danielle Smith says she talked to the Trump officials about, or Trump's guys about, trying to sort of come out and slow things down and, back off because he speaking in this way is helping the liberals. So I don't know. And we've seen Elon Musk be incredibly supportive of Pierre Poilievre on socials. He's amplified his videos. He amplified the Jordan Peterson interview with Poilievre. So I don't know, like, what was your take on that commentary from Trump? Did you think that it was just him riffing in his Trump way, or do you think there was any more strategy behind it?
Yeah, I'm more on the riff side of things.
Yeah, I
In the
waffle.
sense,
I'm leaning towards
yeah,
that though.
I just think like, he has said that Polyev is not a MAGA guy, because he
Yeah.
doesn't see him, kind of openly embracing Trump, even though a lot of the policies that Polyev supports and a lot of the rhetoric that he uses is very Trumpian, even though, so much of the mainstream media in Canada won't admit that and seems to want to like both sides what's going on there. But then along with that, like, I think after Trump had said those things, Polyev had come out and been like, "Yeah, I'm not a MAGA guy. I'm Canada first." Blah blah blah. And so
Which
like I think it's
sounds like
just
mega by another name, but
exact. It is, yeah. But
yeah.
so I think what I see is just him kind of pushing back on those things, and I don't really make very much of his point that he would rather deal with a liberal. Like I really just think it's Trump like spouting something off in the heat of the moment when he's asked something by a journalist who he's talking to. Like personally, I really don't put much into that, and I don't really care.
I know. And I think that honestly, we Canadians often don't realize how little of a shit Americans give about us. Like, me even thinking that he's putting that much thought into our election is just slightly ridiculous. Okay,
Totally.
Paris, I think we're just about at time. So I want to ask you, what are you watching for in the campaign? What are the big things that you're going to be looking out for the weeks ahead?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I think I'm I want to see what Carney is going to do, the types of policy positions that he actually puts out there, and, whether he can actually connect with Canadians. We know that he's not like the most charismatic guy. We know that he's not the best speaker. His French is not the best, but, are we in this moment where Canadians are willing to overlook that? For Polyev, how extreme is he going to go? And is he going to be able to present this as something that is really, going to attract more Canadians, or is he just going to turn more and more people off as people pay more attention to what he's doing? And it doesn't seem to align with how, a lot of Canadians feel like they want to respond to what is happening south of the border. And can his attempts to keep trying to push, the carbon tax and affordability really work at a moment where people are concerned about sovereignty and nationalism? The NDP, can they really like win anybody
Exist.
over? Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
are they even? We're at the point where we're asking if they're even going to keep official party status. Like, that is how bad it looks for the New Democrats right now. I know I've heard, anecdotally that they're having trouble finding candidates even in parts of the country. I think it looks really bad for the NDP right now, because a lot of those more progressive voters are just saying, we need to stop Polyev. We need to make a strong show of force against Trump, and kind of back the Liberals and Mark Carney. So I think the NDP is really in trouble, and I'm interested to see how much that affects the bloc in Quebec as well, and whether Carney's French, and not so good French skills can still cut through, because we saw some indication in some polling that even some French speaking Quebecers were more willing to vote Liberal than they often are. The Greens, I don't know. I don't really care what's going on there.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much on the same page as you, especially with the Polyev sort of far right stuff. I found it interesting that he used the word globalist again in his speech today, and the Carney Century Initiative stuff smacks of a bit of great replacement theory to me. So like there's a little bit of
Absolutely.
conspiracy dog whistling already starting to happen. So definitely be keeping my eyes peeled for that. Obviously, I think that a huge issue within authoritarianism and rising authoritarianism that we're seeing worldwide is attacks on the press. So I'm very curious to see how Polyev's ability to, because he's limiting press access during this campaign, he's not letting them on the bus with him. I'm very curious to see how that plays out and how he interacts with the media. He was weirdly nice to them today. Like, he actually answered all their questions and took mostly mainstream questions. So I don't know if he just
Yeah.
thinks
He's
because he's
also
going to be
not
dealing with.
allowing them to ask follow-up questions, though.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be watching for his relationship with the media, Pierre Poilievre's relationship with the media, Carney's relationship with the media, which I think is being presented in a bit of a false equivalency way,
Mhm.
where when he kicked back at Western Standard, which is a ridiculous like rag of an outlet, and he like got criticized by some in the I saw on the At Issue panel, they were talking about him and the Rosie Barton sort of interaction as well, but they lumped it together to imply that he's been snippy with media. And I kind of feel like it's only really been one incident that is like somewhat notable, the Western Standard one. I actually think Canadians liked. I saw even on the Alberta subreddit, they were responding positively to it. So that should tell you something. But yeah, I think overall it's going to be a really interesting campaign. And Paris and I are going to be here to watch it for all of you. And hopefully you guys can stick around as your campaign cops are on the case.
We're here. Yeah.
We're
I'm
here.
I'm excited to do this with you as well, Rachel. As I was saying to you, I'm gonna need an outlet to vent about what happens in this election. And it's nice that we have 5 weeks to vent about it, and then we can move on to whatever Trump is doing next, or
Totally. It's so hard for me to take you seriously with those sunglasses on.
I know, I'm sorry.
Okay, Paris.
This was your idea,
I
remember?
know,
Yeah.
I know. I don't know. Okay, I came up with it like in the shower yesterday. So, it's really a lot of thought went into it. Okay, so guys, if you like this show, make sure you subscribe so that you can keep up with us. Paris, where can people keep up with you?
Totally. I'm on Blue Sky at Paris Marx. Someday I'll get on TikTok, but at the moment I'm not doing that. I have a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us, another one called System Crash if you're interested in tech stuff. But yeah.
And as for me, you can subscribe to Bubble Pop with Rachel Gilmore on my Substack, Patreon, or YouTube. I'm also very easy to find all over social media. And I'd like to give a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for throwing together the sound for this show. You can find him on Spotify, artist name Hans, lowercase h, with an exclamation mark. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Campaign Cops.